Well, welcome. This is a discussion that we're having today with Dr. John Stark. We will be going over his book. Let me do this. It's probably a world's record for the longest title of a book I've ever come across. Products 2019, a project to map and blueprint the flow of management of products across the product lifecycle: ideation, definition, realization, supportive use, retirement, and recycling. Did I miss anything?
Sounds good.
Okay. It's an excellent book. And well, first off, thank you for writing it. It's hopefully going to give us a lot of interesting conversation today. And it's obviously, been impactful for me being on the outside of the PLM world in a sense. I've gained a lot more background, but we'll dive into that in a moment. So how do you get this book that we're going to be talking about? You want to go onto Amazon, and I'll include a link here in the description. John, I think you have a copy of it, so you know what. Why don't you go ahead and hold that up so we know what the cover looks like. Excellent. I am joined here today by Chad Burgoyne also, and I think Chad was going to do our introductions a little bit, give John Stark's bio, build him up, make him look great.
Thanks. All right, so John Stark is a leading expert, consultant, CEO, and writer at the forefront of product lifecycle management. He's worked with companies across all areas of product lifecycle management, from innovation through definition to retirement. His clientele includes more than 100 manufacturing organizations across 20 countries on 4 continents, and includes a wide range of industry sectors. And Jared is our director of marketing here at Domain, and has been here for 8 years, and is an avid fisherman, from what I understand.
Yep, feared by fish everywhere. John, I warned you about this. I was going to ask you a personal question, something that's not on your official bio. Can you tell us something about you that few people know?
I'll tell you something useful, perhaps, that I started life as a physicist. And I actually did my degrees in London University. And then that got me to Geneva, which is where I am now, Geneva, Switzerland. And I worked in CERN, which is the European Nuclear Research Center. But I think that background of being a physicist is important, for what I do, because I'm not an engineer. And I think many of the people working in the product lifecycle are engineers, and engineers tend to have a different way of life to physicists. Engineers typically like to do things, make things. Physicists are more thinking about how things are working. And I guess that's what makes me or turns me towards writing about products, trying to understand how this product life cycle is working.
So I know we've talked about this, but how you mentioned that you worked for CERN in Geneva. They were implementing, as I understood it, some new computer systems to manage the particle accelerator, and that's kind of what brought you on. What did you call those, PDP-11s? Is that right?
That's right, PDP-11, yeah.
Okay. So how did you go from physicist to system implementation?
Well, in physics, there was I can't really say that everything was manual when I started, but about the time I did my PhD, things were being digitalized, if you like. Digitalization was taking place. So although in theory, I was behaving like a typical physicist might have behaved 50 years ago, at the same time, I was also taking advantage of these new technologies that were coming along, like computers, mini computers like this PDP-11. And these computers were starting to be used to control the accelerators and then to analyze the results of the particle collisions, because there were huge numbers of collisions that we were looking at. On the experiments I worked with, the particles were being recorded on photographs with 3 views of each event. And then these things got reconstructed into 3D models of what was happening. But on my particular experiment, I think there were 300,000 events. So it wasn't something you could do manually. You had to do it by computer. So that's how I got into the computer side of it.
I know a lot of the people viewing this video might not fully grasp what CERN is or even their mission. They're on the forefront of nuclear science. They examine molecules at such a small, minuscule, or microscopic size, but that have implications for so many things. And as I understand it, this entire endeavor began with the nuclear age. And that's kind of what has carried them on to today. But very interesting. I wish we could devote a whole video to that, because Chad and I were both talking. This is a fascinating subject to both of us. So John, if I counted correctly, you have 22 or 23 now textbooks.
I've given up counting, but it sounds about right.
That many. So physics, computer science, and PDM, PLM. Well, what got you into writing?
What got me into writing? Well, I probably had some kind of a writing background coming from the research side of thing, because on the research, you always finish up doing some kind of a report about the research. So you have to write things. And then the other thing I found, and this is when I started writing more towards the PDM area, was that I was working in CAD in the late 1980s. And I had the impression that none of the people who I was working with in industry understood anything at all about CAD, apart from how to click on the screen, and make things happen on the screen. People didn't really understand about what was happening behind in the system, or how you should manage it, or how you should manage the data, or the training, or how you should bring it into a company. There was nothing written at the time about any of those things. So the systems were there, the systems worked. There were obviously some people who understood, enough to develop the software, but that was about as far as it went. And at that time, I started writing some books to try to explain, what was happening when you put CAD into a company.
That's interesting. So aspirations to be a writer, you didn't have that as a child or anything. It's just something that you had to kind of
Absolutely not.
do by necessity, huh?
It kind of came about by, I guess it wasn't absolutely necessary, but perhaps I felt that it would be very useful, so in that way it was necessary. It was important.
You saw a void and you decided to fill it.
Yep. So that started with the CAD books, which were in about 1988, I think. And then very soon after that came one in about 1990 or 1991, which had a name something like Engineering Information Systems Beyond CAD to Support Concurrent Engineering, something like that. So it was kind of going beyond CAD into what I called Engineering Information Systems, which you could say was PDM systems, but it was also including this thing about concurrent engineering, which is how you organize the way people are working in the company. So for the first time, it was bringing together the two, the systems and the organization. So that was that one. And then I can show you another one that I wrote. Here comes this one. So this one is Product Lifecycle Management, 21st Century Paradigm for Product Realization. So that guy I wrote in 2001, I think, and it got published 2004. And it's now up to its 4th edition. And the 5th edition is going to be published fairly soon.
So you are keeping busy with this whole writing project, it sounds like. What other projects do you have on the table if you can?
Well, like I mentioned, or like Chad mentioned, I've actually worked with more than 100 companies on kind of PLM consulting. So that could be anything from, a PLM vision or business process consulting, how to improve the product development process or the engineering change management process, or implementing product data management system, training, all sorts of things around PDM. And then at the same time, once this book got written in its 1st edition in 2001, the publisher says, why don't you update it, after 5 years or something like that. So typically add a couple of chapters. So each new edition brings in 2 more chapters. I think the latest edition is going to bring in digital twin and digital thread. And the previous one brought in Internet of Things and Industry 4.0. So as time goes by, the new technologies come in. But in many ways, the underlying issues don't change. We're still in this position for me, where most people don't understand what we're talking about when we talk about PDM and PLM, which in a way brings us on to Products 2019, which is trying to explain, what actually happens in a company across the life cycle, from the first ideas to the product all the way through until it gets recycled.
Yeah, and that's actually a good lead in. So your target audience with that book, I assume it wasn't heads of engineering departments. It must have been, what do we call them, newbies, people who are fresh out of school or maybe even going through college. I got that right?
Yeah, probably, although I'm not really sure, who the target audience was now. I wrote it during the beginning of the COVID period mainly, and I wasn't thinking too much about the audience. I mean, after a while, the main thought was just, how could I finish this thing and do something else? But what I've seen since then is that one of the big target audiences is actually people doing master's degrees, masters in some kind of an engineering or some kind of master in product management, something like that. So I think they're typically people who are, let's say, 25, 30, they've got a basic 1st degree, they've been in industry for a few years, and then they go back and they try and get a higher degree. And it seems this book is, useful for them, because they can relate to what is happening. And at the same time, it expands their understanding of the whole company, because often they've worked in 1 or 2 parts of the company, but haven't seen the whole thing. And some of the professors who use it, they've managed to come up with, exercises for their students. So they say to the students, come up with the organization chart of the company, or find out, tell me what was the last one now? I think, I don't know if you remember, but when we get to the weekend, Jane usually goes and sits down and tries to answer the question that she's been asked about what the product life cycle looks about. And she starts off one week and she just have a simple diagram. And then as she goes through different weeks, she extends and expands that diagram. So one of the professors set the students the task of showing, what was happening, what she was doing every week and how her picture was growing. And apparently that kept them busy, for a few weeks, and probably taught them something as well. So somehow it comes out as being a teaching tool as well.
Yeah. Now you've mentioned that you've done textbooks primarily. This is your first, shall we say, non-textbook.
Yep.
You've mentioned Jane, the character in the book. Can you tell us maybe what makes Products 2019 different from your other textbooks?
Well, if I think of the other textbooks, I could show you this one again, and then I show it sideways on. I mean, it's quite big.
Mm-hmm.
This one here, if I look at the back, it's up to page 538 or something like that, 544. And as several people have said to me, reading that makes them fall asleep. And I think that's kind of typical of academic textbooks. You can't really read them, because if you try and read them through from the beginning to the end, you fall asleep. There's just so much facts in there. And the idea with Products 2019 was to have more of a story that people could follow that wouldn't send them to sleep.
Sure.
Which is why it's got this story of Jane, you know, doing her thesis in there.
Yeah. Frankly, I thought it was a fascinating, even daring, I guess, a daring approach to approaching PLM. And I, for one, was glad to hear that it began circulating as a textbook, because I thought, hey, well, this, you know, reads like a novel. There's still so much in there. It's rich in that whole overarching view of what goes on in a company, and that the silos that typical companies will experience when they don't have proper IT solutions managing the different aspects. Would you say that this storyline, this company, I should say, is pretty typical of most businesses today?
Well, I guess the answer is yes and no. That you know, the company, as you know, it's making some kind of machine tools, and it's international. So it has sites in Germany, France, and the US, and it's got 5 sites, and the 5 sites are all doing something slightly different, although they're all, you know, coming up with these machine tools. And I think, you know, if you look at machine tool companies, you could say that what is there is fairly similar among machine tools, because machine tools, you know, used to be very mechanical, you know, lots of metal basically, and hydraulics, stuff like that, electrical. And then they started getting more electronics and then more software into them. So that kind of changes the, you know, the way that the product has to be developed and supported. So I guess the story is true for that kind of company. But if you went for another kind of company like, you know, Google or Microsoft, I mean, you know, then it's a different industry. So it's probably less true from the details point of view. Apart from that, have some things that they expect from a business book. You know, they expect from a business book, for example, that there should be an organization chart of the company, you know, so they can quickly look at this and see how the company is organized. And then they don't like the fact that these pictures that I mentioned before about Jane's thoughts of how the life cycle looks like, that are not in the book. And that they don't like that, basically, the higher level of management, probably because they want to read it, they want to learn it quickly and then move on. But my thinking was more, you know, there are so many books where you do have these organization charts. And in my experiences, I look at it for 5 seconds, you know, and I think I've understood everything and I don't bother to look at it again. And I think in this book, it's actually important to understand, you know, what is on that chart, what it is saying. And that's why it's not in the book. I mean, my thinking is that the person who's reading it should actually have a piece of paper next to them and they should draw out the chart as they go along. You know, I don't know how the company is organized. When I first meet them, they might give me an organization chart, but I don't really believe it, because I know often that organization chart doesn't totally reflect what is happening in the company. So I leave these things open, and I think the students don't object to doing that kind of work, but the upper levels of management don't like it very much.
Yeah. No, if I could maybe take a slightly critical spin, this isn't a complaint that I have, but the whole, this is what Jane had for breakfast this morning, which I found fascinating. It was a lot of the foods I don't know that I would ever personally try, but the point is the minutia, the added details, which obviously go into writing a novel, which was what your objective was. But yeah, I think that they were expecting more a referenceable textbook with a glossary and
okay. I can imagine. Yep.
Conceptual. And so what would you say to those people?
Well, I go into a long explanation, but just in answer to what you were saying, I mean, I can understand, they say they like a nice textbook, but then you start getting into this kind of thing for PLM. If you really want to go in the details, you're going to finish up with thousands of pages. And at the same time, I think these people, they tend to like these business books. You go on Amazon, you find business books, and then I look at some of them and I think, it's 5 pages long. And I wonder, these people, do they seriously think, that from a 5-page long book, they're going to learn anything? But somehow that seems to be what people expect now. A 5-page book, a 5-minute podcast, and then you learn everything from that. And my approach is very different from that, especially with this book. It was to say, if we're really going to get Jane to come up with the answer to this question that she gets from the boss of the company, which is to show what is happening to the product throughout the life cycle, there are going to be a lot of details in there, because it's going to start somehow, well, where does the idea come from? Or is there even an idea? Is it coming from the market, or is it coming from a customer? And there are all these different cases. Then there's somebody in R&D at one time says, oh, I've got an idea for this product. So just if you look on the idea is coming from several places. And, then go into definition, manufacturer, and support, and recycling. And I think often those last 3, they just get forgotten about. It's just assumed we have a product. Oh, okay, it gets serviced, maintained. We don't care about that, because all we're interested in is selling, the thing. The more I work with PLM, the more I think it's not like that from the product point of view. Maybe it is from the company point of view, because you've got to sell products, make money. But if you really look at the product, you start seeing there are all these details. And towards the end, you'll remember they have these meetings where they start counting the number of documents they've got. And I think, it comes out, I can't remember if it's 80 or 100 or something like that. And then one of the characters starts reading out the list of the documents, and they actually exist, So they're there. You can't make a product without, documenting all these things. And there's just so much to document these days. There's so much data out there.
Oh, yeah. And to coordinate too. As I was reading the book, it was just kind of fascinating how little one department knows about what the other is doing. So I have to ask, it seems like there were a great deal of complaints targeted towards the other guys. Whatever team is being interviewed by Jane, that team lead is always blaming another department. Engineering, I thought, was probably the most, I don't know, not
most blamed.
Most blamed. Do you find that to be a typical thing in your day-to-day work?
Yeah, definitely.
Really? Too bad they get the short end of the stick, but I guess they are the dreamers, aren't they? They don't necessarily go onto the floor and understand how their ideas need to be brought to life.
Yeah, well, that's one way of putting it. But I mean, at the same time, they're the ones who have to come up with the all the details of the product. Sure. And they might say, we're so busy focusing on what we're doing and doing it well that we don't have the time to talk to all these, these other people.
So, if you could give us like a high-level overview of the story. So we've got Jane, we've mentioned her. She works for a company called Mayor, or is interning with a company called Mayor. What else? From start to finish, just 1 minute, go.
I think there are maybe 3 layers in this book. So one of them is the story of Jane. She's doing her MBA and she has to write a thesis on some subject. And she finishes up writing the thesis with this German company called Mayer. So the book is going to follow through her, her research, her understanding of the thesis, of the subject, eventually coming up to her writing a thesis. So that's one part of the story. And then another part of the story is when she's doing this. So she goes to see the company, she meets the boss, he tells her, who to go and see, what he wants her to do, and he wants her to find out what is happening to his products across their life cycle. And he mentions a couple of theories that he has heard about from university, but he's forgotten about almost, and he'd like to know, what is really happening. So he suggests she interviews people in their main site to start with, and then goes and visits another site in Germany, interviews some more people there, goes to a third site, which is in France, and interviews people there. So in each of those sites, she looks at the organization chart. She sees there's marketing, engineering, production, service, quality, business processes, finance, so departments. And so she goes and talks to these people to find out what they're doing, what applications they use, what documents they have. And she does that for those 3 sites. And she kind of comes up with an overall picture. And then the boss says, well, go and talk to our people in the US in our 2 sites, Cleveland and Atlanta, and see if it's the same picture over there. So that's basically what she does. By the time she's finished all that, the boss thinks it's looking good. And he says, well, let's have a cross-functional, cross-site team and try and work out what to do next. So they get people together from the German sites, the French sites, the US sites, and they start looking at how to work across the product lifecycle from ideation into product definition, into product realization, out into service, and then finally recycling. And then just hold on a little bit, there's another little bit of story, which I think is about my experience in consulting, which is that, if I transform or project that onto Jane, that comes up with this story that all the time she's in hotels, and you go down in the morning and you have breakfast and it looks good the first day, and then you see the same thing the second day, and it's third day it's the same. So it gets very monotonous. And she also is experiencing that kind of thing at the same time. So she's not just seeing what is happening with the product across the life cycle. She's also kind of seeing, what it's like to be a consultant who is working with different companies on their particular projects.
I had a little bit of a unique upbringing. My father was a PLM consultant as well for a early company back in the PDM days called Sherpa.
Oh, yeah.
Heard of them?
Yeah. I even went there to headquarters once.
Oh,
San Jose.
That's great. While he was doing that, obviously a lot of travel, and that burned him out. Do you still, pre-COVID days, did you do a lot of that kind of travel that Jane did?
Yep.
Yeah. How much would you say of the book is actually based on real situations that you've personally had to encounter?
I guess all of it is. I think everything that happened in there, it happened at some time with one customer or another. But I remember there were 100 customers, so
Sure.
I can't really point, to each. I can't point to any customer and say, where they appear in the book. But somehow it all comes together, and it's all happened. I think when Jane goes to see well, now I can't remember exactly, but there, you know, everything that is in there, you know, comes from real life. It's like when the production guy is criticizing the people in engineering, you know, for not being professional and not having documentation. And then he shows her his working procedures, you know, and claims engineering doesn't have that. I mean, everything like that, all those little details, they really come from real life situations.
Well, I can't emphasize enough. It was a rich read for me. And actually the first PLM book I ever bought. Read a lot online, but that was the first PLM book that I actually purchased.
It's not very expensive either.
No, I didn't break the bank too bad, I guess. No, but yeah, anybody watching this, I invite you to pick it up. It is an inexpensive read, but one that you won't regret.
Expensive or inexpensive?
Inexpensive. Sorry about that. Yeah. So, John, thank you very much. We talked about a prequel that you have released, or is that in the works to be released?
No, the prequel is released. It's called Firing Invention, okay. And it's available on Amazon.
Okay. We'll have to look into that one and maybe do this again. Is there going to be a sequel?
I've been asked that question several times. And I don't know, honestly. When I think about how long it took to write this one, which I guess was 3, 4, 5 months, something like this, you know, during COVID lockdown, I guess the sequel would probably take as long as that. But, you know, unless we have another COVID lockdown, it would be difficult to find, you know, that amount of time, you know, where there are not other things to do.
I was curious about that. How long does a book generally take while you have your day-to-day work going on?
Years, maybe 2 years, 3 years, something like that.
Well, great. Thank you so much, John. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to leave everybody with?
Well, I'd like to hear if you think it's been useful for your everyday work. You know, is it useful?
Yep, I believe so, but I guess time will tell. As far as with my background it's in the behavioral sciences, psychology. So understanding a little bit more about those people and actually assigning a person to those roles that I've been hearing about, you know, since I've worked in this space, that has helped me a great deal to start to delineate and organize, I guess, who the different roles are and what their particular challenges are. What about you, Chad?
Yeah, no, it's coming from a computer science background. It's definitely kind of related to how things are laid out in this new industry that I'm coming into. So I can relate to the IT guy being frustrated with how things weren't documented right, and when Jane was asking for a computer, and totally see how that's frustrating.
More real life stories, real life situations.
Well, we look forward to the future and seeing what publications you have coming out next, and I look forward to reading the prequel to Products 2019.
Yep.
Again, the link to John's books, how about we include the prequel also, will be listed in the details below. And as always, the conversation continues offline at www.domainsi.com. John, thanks so much for being here. It's been a pleasure and an honor. And if our friends had questions that were just burning that they had to ask you, how would they get a hold of you?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. And thank you for watching, everybody. If you'd like to get in contact with me, maybe the simplest is on LinkedIn. You know, John Stark, PLM, that will be me.
Great. Well, thank you so much, John. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Bye.
Yeah, thanks.